We're here today, myself and Allison, and we're here to give you some options to stretch out the body and to release some of those tight spots that we find that kind of causes discomfort or a lack of range of motion. And we wanted to give you options while we're not in the studio and we can't put our hands on you. We want to show you in the most simplest ways how you might be able to reach those tight spots on your own. Okay, so we're going to start from the head down, and Allison's going to start with her occipital. Right behind here.
This is the occipital muscles. So
Yes.
what we'll do, and actually I will have you demonstrate this one because I think it'll be a little better of a visual for people to hear and watch. So what we'll have you do, if you don't mind, is you can lay down on your back.
Okay.
And those of you guys at home, you'll just need a yoga block for this one. Cork blocks work a little better just because they're more dense. These purple squishy blocks will be just fine. If you have a couple of books, you can also substitute. So I'm going to put it on the medium setting for Kathy. Medium is this one. This is the low setting. This is the tall setting. Tall is a little too precarious. Low just won't take you as deep. Medium is ideal, but low or medium will work. And so what I'll do, since Kathy's going to lay back this way, is I'll set the block medium setting, and then I'll drag my thumbs up the back of her neck to find right where the base of her skull meets the top of her spine. So if I was finding it on myself, if I were practicing by myself at home, I would take my thumbs up the back of my neck from that kind of dinosaur bone, which is C7, that little protruding bone at the back of the neck. And I would slide my thumbs up the base of the skull, or up the back of the neck rather, until I find the base of the skull, and my thumbs will slide into two little pockets. So those two pockets are where the suboccipital muscles insert along the base of the skull. And that's the same line that I want to end up putting Kathy's ridge of her skull on top of the edge of the block. So we want to actually find a hard edge. It's not going to work as well if you're on the flat part of the block, because we really want it to kind of dig into that area, which sounds aggressive, but we're pressing into these muscles so that they get this prompt to then start to release and soften over top of the block. Some things that tend to happen that I just want you to be wary of is sometimes the block will end up at an angle like so. This can be really jarring if it suddenly decides to straighten itself out. Another thing that can tend to happen is if I don't really measure where I want Kathy's head to be, what she might end up doing is she might place the block a little too low on the neck, and then she'll end up kind of cutting into the cervical spine, and it just won't be comfortable, and the back of the head won't have as much support. If you've got a bigger skull and one block just doesn't feel supportive enough, you can take a second block and place it behind the first. You can have a blanket that kind of pours over the back of the block, or you can grab whatever's around and just kind of let yourself set up a better situation so the ground comes up to you and you're supported. Once I've got Kathy in position, or once I'm in position, if I'm doing this on myself, first I might just relax here for a while and let the back of the head just be heavy on the block. But then after a while, to kind of target the different muscles that line the base of the skull, what I tend to do, especially when I'm working with you guys in class, is I'll have my practitioner, Kathy, you're the practitioner for now, turn their head all the way to the right, like they're looking over their right shoulder. When they do that, the block gets a little offset with the base of the skull. So I'll have them gently bring the right corner of the block a little closer to their right shoulder. They can reach back and kind of pull it into the position that feels best for them. I just kind of did it for her to save time. Once she gets there, two options. She wants to be as heavy as she can so that she really takes advantage of the myofascial release that will come with this exercise. But if she wants to be a little more active and or to find really sweet spots where they need to release, she can do little micro movements back and forth, almost like she's saying no, but she doesn't really want anyone to notice how much her head is moving. So that's one option. I have her, or I have whoever's practicing, turn their head all the way to one side. They'll stay there for a while. If you can be there for 5 minutes, great. If you've got 30 seconds of your life to spare, that's great. If you've got no time, obviously save this exercise for when you've got some time to spread it out. But you could even be here for 10, 15 minutes if you really wanted to. Next step is I would have her come a third of the way back to center. So you can imagine that 90-degree angle being cut into thirds. So she's 1/3 of the way back, still tilted mostly to the right. And then same thing, she can just relax and kind of sink into the block, or she can rock the head a little bit side to side if she wants to. and have her stay there again for 5 minutes, 10 minutes if we had the luxury of a really long class time, or if you were just practicing this at home. After a little while, I'd have her come another third of the way back towards center. Not all the way to center, but 2/3 at this point from where she got started with her head all the way to the right. And then same thing, she can sink right into it. She can rock a little side to side. You'll notice she's put her hands really comfortably at the front of her pelvis, at her ASIS area, the front of the hip joint, or the front of the pelvic bones rather. That's a really great place to rest the arms. You can also spin the palms open and get a passive chest opener if you wanted to, exactly just like that. After she's spent another minute or 5 or 10 in this position, she'll come back to center. You'll notice the block is a little bit tilted to the right, so we'll bring it back straight up and down the center line at the base of her skull. She can rest there and pause and compare and contrast right side, left side. And then we would repeat that same thing over to the left. So we're going to speed it up just for timing in our video here. But when she's ready, she can turn her head all the way to the left. She might reach her left hand back to catch the left corner, left edge of the block and bring it a little closer to her left shoulder. Just do it for her like so. And that's just, again, to make sure that she's still lined up with the base of her skull, rather than being somewhere down the neck or cutting into the SCM or the scalene muscles, which might just be really uncomfortable. She'll stay there for a little bit, then she'll come 1/3 of the way back towards center. She'll pause there. She might choose to move around a little bit. She might choose to just stay relaxed. Then she'll come 2/3 of the way back after some time. She'll pause there and see what that feels like. She might spend a minute or 5 or 10, depending on how much time she's allotted for this whole exercise. But you do want to remember right side and left side, regardless of your injury or your tension, you want to try to even them out. So if your right side is way tighter, you can spend more time there. If your left side is way tighter, vice versa. If you've got an ant on you, you can either choose to sit with it or you can get rid of it. And then eventually, to bring it back, she'll come back to center. We'll adjust the block. After she's done 1/3 of the way back, 2/3 of the way back, she'll come all the way back. And then she's got the option of either just sitting there for a while, maybe 5 more minutes, maybe 2, maybe 30 seconds. Or sometimes I like to have you guys turn the head all the way to the right without adjusting the block. And then trace all the way back to center. Pause, so there's no momentum in it, and then go all the way to the left and all the way back to center. And you can sort of get creative with it as you find those ropey areas where there's more tension or there's a sudden tenderness. You might just lean into them and let them unwind a little bit further. So that's the suboccipital exercise. Not super complicated, but something that you definitely want to line up the right way. The next thing that we can do is another suboccipital exercise, but it requires more props. So we're going to have Kathy use the block again, but she can lift her head off of the block. And it's really important when you come up and off of the block, exactly, to support your head as you lift up. Then you can take a hand back, remove the block, and gently relax your head down to the floor. You don't want to just whip the block out from underneath you and drop your head down. That's going to undo all the work that we just worked on to get everything settled. Now, next thing that we'll need, and Kathy, you can stay right there. You're doing a wonderful job.
Remember what Alison said was a myofascial release. Myo is the muscle and fascia is the connective tissue. So we're taking and we're stretching what gets really, really tight back there, especially if the head is perched forward. For every inch the head is perched forward from its cervical spine, it adds an extra 10 pounds of weight to it and makes those muscles overwork. And that's why our neck and shoulders sometimes get very, very tight when we're looking and texting so much and working at a computer. So these are great exercises to relieve that tightness back there. Also, I got a little bit of gurgling in my stomach. Don't worry about that because we're hitting gallbladder points and digestive points back here. So when you hear a little bit of gurgle, that's a good sign. That means your digestive system is working. So just a little extra FYI for you.
Perfect. Good add-ons. So the next exercise is going to be a similar area. This one you'll need either, I have this little peanut double lacrosse ball setup, which you can buy probably on Amazon. This is by Gillsun Fitness, Gillsun. Guess I'm giving them a little shout out, so you can buy their products if you want. You can also make these by putting 2 lacrosse balls or 2 tennis balls in a sock and then tying off the end of the sock. What I'm going to do with it is Kathy will bring her head to center and she's going to put it right behind the occipital area the same way she did that previous exercise. Once she gets it in place to where it's right behind those two little notches at the base of the skull, she might decide, wow, that's really intense, and she might just relax there. If it's too high and the back of the head feels like it's precariously perched into the air, she can slide it down a little bit and just start lower in the base of the skull and at the back of the neck. If that's the case, you may be better off starting with your block to get that ridge at the base of the skull and then working down into more of the cervical spine. And the cervical spine is the piece of spine in your neck. Now, what she'll do to enhance this exercise, only if she needs to, is she can step her feet flat like bridge pose and point her knees to the ceiling. She can relax her arms into whatever position is comfortable. And then what she'll do, only if she wants to make it more intense for the back of the neck, which may or may not be the case, she'll step into her feet, lift her pelvis up like bridge pose. And as she lifts her pelvis up like bridge pose, medium setting or lower setting, we can slide a block underneath her lower back. Let's go low for now. And then she can rest her sacrum on the block. Now, this block exercise, this supported bridge exercise, can be done without the peanut lacrosse ball set up underneath the base of the neck. But if she sets that up, we're going to get these muscles up here in the cervical area, and that little elevation of the sacrum is going to help with digestion. It's going to help with a little bit of hip flexor release as the hips extend. So all sorts of good stuff going on there. Now, if she's been here for, say, a minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, however much time she's able to allot, what she can do little by little is she can step into her feet, lift her hips up, and then roll herself just an inch towards the back of the mat, towards me, so that the lacrosse balls underneath the base of her neck, they actually slide down just a notch or two. If they don't roll very well based on traction or based on whatever kind of floor you have underneath you, you can just reach back with your hands and adjust them. But the key is to work down the spine segment by segment until eventually you get into somewhere around the shoulder blade area. Once you get there, you won't really want the block underneath your low back anymore because it'll be too pressurized on the back of the rib cage. And then eventually you'll be in the lumbar area where the pelvis is kind of lifted up off the floor, so you won't have as much pressure to sink into. So eventually, as she moves segment by segment down the spine on her own time frame, because she's noticing what feels like it's helping, what's allowing her to release, eventually when she's done with that, she can lift her hips up, get rid of the block, and then she can use those two little peanuts in the lower back, just sinking all the way into them. So if you want to, Kathy, you can lift your hips up, get rid of the block. Yeah, and then come down nice and easy. And you can just roll to one side, whichever side you like. And then we'll take those same two little peanuts and place them down the mat farther so that she can then find her way onto her back and let those two balls become on either side of the lumbar area. If you have SI joint dysfunction, if you have QL dysfunction, if you even have tightness that maybe you can't name, that you can't really identify, this is a really great way to just let your body weight help you into those muscles so that they can start to unwind with pressure. Did you have something to add to this one? Or? No. Okay, so we're doing good. So this is another way to get into the lower back. As we all probably have seen and heard before, you can also do that with a foam roller on its own. So the next thing that we'll do is, Kathy, you can lift up off of the lacrosse balls, just place them off to the side. And what we'll do instead is we'll have you lift your pelvis up. I'll get rid of those in a moment. And you can just kind of relax your sacrum down onto the foam roller. Now, this one's a little bit more intuitive. There's not really a whole lot of setup or takeaway, but what you want to do is you want to, again, apply your body weight into the foam roller so you can just start rolling up and down the length of the spine. So Kathy, if you just want to intuitively walk your feet out a little bit and kind of curl yourself over the foam roller so that eventually your pelvis sinks its way down to the floor. It's a little easier if we started it at the top of the spine, but as you can see, Kathy's just kind of melting over the foam roller and exploring how that's going to allow her to pressurize into her upper back.
Arms a little bit because it's sliding.
That's fine, yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a fun, do it however it feels good kind of a thing. I like to think of like a bear in the woods getting its back up against a tree. Kind of do the same thing with a foam roller. So that's a nice easy way to get into the mid back and lower back with your foam roller. the back of the rib cage and into the mid traps and upper traps will feel really good when you release them with a foam roller. Looks good. And then once she's sort of released that area, we can get into the glutes and the lower part of the back body and the piriformis. So next thing that you can do is you can lift off of your foam roller and just slide that out from underneath you, same way you did with the block earlier. Perfect. Next thing that you can do, we'll have you sit up for this next one, Kathy. So take your time, just roll to a side and sit up. You can make a figure 4 of your legs like we would do for supine pigeon on our backs. Yeah, you can stay on the mat. Perfect. And then once Kathy has her figure 4 set up, this is a really good one for glutes and piriformis. She's actually going to press into her hands to lift her butt up and away from the floor. And then we're going to place the foam roller just so that she can kind of lean into the hip that's crossed over the opposite thigh. Oh. And again, it's nice and intuitive. She's just going to kind of take that shape and swivel it side to side. She can kind of roll up and down the foam roller, drag it forward and back. She's using her upper body to support her lower body so that there's minimal pressure into the glute piriformis until she wants there to be pressure there. Yeah, this one's a little bit intense. So you can
get right into those glutes, boy. Boy. All those leg lifts we do to tone up the butt, strengthen the butt muscles. Oh.
That's exactly right. If you're doing a lot of bar classes, Pilates classes, you definitely want to keep some poses like this in mind so that you can open all that stuff up. Eventually, again, after she's spent the luxury of her time working out the left side, she can just stop at some point, step switch her legs so the left foot goes flat, right ankle crosses over the left thigh, and then she's going to lean and kind of adjust herself in the direction of the glute that she's looking to stretch. And again, the one that we're stretching or the one that we're working into is the one that corresponds to the ankle crossed over the thigh. So same thing, and she can kind of lean to the right and lean to the left. She can cat-cow the pelvis to find different angles. She can lift her chest up more or less based on just her upper body strength, pushing her away from the ground. So she gets to decide exactly how much body weight, how much pressure she's going to put into that foam roller as she opens things up.
And sometimes it's very surprising when you know, because our bodies are very different from side to side. And when you think one side is the tighter side, when you get into the other side, it's like, oh.
It's true. Yeah, there's a lot of compensation patterns that we sometimes don't expect. Sometimes we know where the local pain is, we're able to identify it, but sometimes that's even a challenging thing to be able to identify because it could be pain referring from one place into another.
But I'm kind of like, I'm right on that piece of meat, right there. I'm sitting right on there.
Yeah, the piriformis,
forward, back and forth, and side to side.
The piriformis, which is the muscle that's responsible mainly for sciatica, unless it's more of a structural dysfunction, is actually right at the center of the glute. So if you made a bullseye of the glute and kind of poked right at the center, that's the area that you want to think about if you're experiencing something like sciatica. So that's kind of the back of the body in a very generalized way. Now let's go down the side of the body just a bit. So Kathy, I'll actually demonstrate this next one only because it'll be a little easier for me to kind of talk to the screen in motion. That way you can take care of Juliet too. So when we get into the side of the body, what we think about with the side of the body is, again, that piriformis area, which we just got in our figure 4 type scenario. Real quick, another thing that you can do to create that same experience if you didn't have a foam roller or if you wanted to be more specific is you could take a tennis ball to that center of the glute area, lift yourself up, and same thing, just kind of trace into the glute and into that space that lines the side of the sacrum. So just another little add-on, same thing, different approach, just based on the props that you have. The next thing that you can kind of learn to release is the lats. And a lot of us have tight lats, whether we know it or not, especially if we're doing things like reaching overhead, maybe working on pull-ups, or if you're a rock climber like me, or even if you've just been kind of going to the gym, lifting free weights for a long time, that'll sort of add up if you're not periodically trying to loosen it up. So for this one, you're going to take a yoga block. You could also use a foam roller in pretty much the same way. I like a yoga block again because it's got a hard edge to it. You'll lay on your side in kind of like a reclined mermaid pose here. And then you'll take the block. Cork block will work a little better, but it'll be a little more masochistic as well. You'll take the block, medium setting again, and you're going to place it as far up into your armpit as possible. Once it's in your armpit, you want to shift yourself back so you can really sink into the block. And then you can actually bend that corresponding elbow and rest your head so that you don't actually have to let your head just hang there in space or run the risk of aggravating your neck. Opposite arm, as you can see, that's just going to brace you a little bit. And then once you've got the edge of your block pressing into the upper part of your lat, right about underneath your armpit, you can start to roll a little forward, roll a little back, and adjust accordingly until you find maybe a sweet spot or until you realize, it's not so tense there. I wonder what else is going on in my lats. After you've done that, maybe for a minute, maybe 5, maybe 10, which is kind of the general rule of thumb, is spend as much time as you're able. You'll release that arm down just to help you lift the rib cage up a little bit and slide the block down a couple of inches. Same thing, sink into the block, let the hard edge find the side of your body, so it's kind of digging into the space between your ribs and releasing the upper portion of the lats. Opposite fingertips can support you. You can just kind of outrigger them in front of you, and then you'll roll forward and roll backward. And forward and backward, and maybe you find a spot that's really intense and you just kind of pause there and settle in there. Women with a lot more breast tissue, you might just have to kind of lift and shift and just make sure that you're not getting into that breast tissue because that'll just be tender and uncomfortable. Again, once you've done some time there, once things have started to alleviate, you'll lift up, slide down a few more inches. Same thing, opposite hand like an outrigger, roll forward, roll backward. And just give yourself some time to take each area into consideration. You might find as you move down the side of the body that it gets more intense. You might find that it gets way less intense very quickly. And just kind of act accordingly. Now, after you've gone all the way down the lats, which will end, about mid rib cage area, because then the lats kind of taper in towards the lower part of the back. You would do the same thing there. And after you found, there's not really any sensation anymore, I think I've gotten it all, you can lift off of your block. And the next one's going to be more about the IT band. I do warn you guys, this next one is not fun at all. So it's a nice one to do, but it can be a really masochistic way to get into the IT band. Another thing worth noting is that the IT band doesn't stretch. It's a really dense band of tissue that's going to wind up really tightly and then will kind of soften, and the muscles around that IT band, those will stretch. So what we're really doing is we're kind of stretching the periphery of the IT band and getting blood flow to the IT band so that things aren't gripping quite so much. For that one, you're going to lift your hips up almost like you're doing side plank, and you'll place the block underneath the outer edge of your thigh. Now, kind of the same setup as our lat release, in that we've got one forearm on the mat and opposite fingertips are kind of like an outrigger. You might find that this is plenty. You might even need to take some pressure off by lifting the top leg up. But what'll tend to happen is it'll get really intense really quickly, and you may even need to tap some toes behind you for extra support. What ideally you would like to do is lift the leg that's underneath and then stack the legs like so. And then this is where it gets a little mermaid-like. You kind of want to shift over the block, forward and back. You can go with the lower block setting, but it won't be quite as intense. So this is probably like the fastest pathway to opening that stuff up. After you're done, a couple of breaths if you can manage, a couple of minutes if you can manage, you'll set your feet down. You'll lift yourself up and just slide the block down a few inches so that you get into a new part of the IT band. Again, you're gonna sort of fishtail your way over that. Does work with a foam roller the same way without the hard edge. Remember, you could be here, you could be here, you could even be here to take a little less pressure off, and you could lift that way if you wanted to go further, but keep yourself on kind of a kickstand type variation of it. You could also be here with feet on the ground, which might be for a lot of us more than enough to work with. I usually try to pick about 3 spots on the IT band. That's another good way to transition, almost like you would for side plank, just stepping the top foot in front, and then maybe you stretch it out, maybe the legs lift up, Same thing, you can kind of fishtail. Your abdominal muscles are engaged. You're not just sinking into your low back. And if you want to, you can even roll forward and back to get more into the quadricep area, which can be really beneficial if you've got tightness around the knee or pain around the knee at any time.
Now, if the person finds it's too much pressure here,
yes,
can they stick
absolutely
under here for a little bit of support if you have a ball? Just be careful you're not on the floating rib.
Yeah.
You want to be on the full part of the rib cage, but it just gives a little extra
absolutely
support.
The only thing that I would caution with that is make sure that you're not then sinking into it to
Right.
be able
Still
to go
gotta
deeper
lift.
into your pose.
Remember that guideline that we always give you is that length from the hip to the armpit and from the shoulder to the neck. You always want to be creating space. You never want to drop into it. You want to keep lifting and lengthening underneath and all the ways up. Okay? Just be careful of that. And again, so that it's not on the floating rib, but just a little extra support that it might help the shoulder position right here if that gets tired. Okay.
Perfect. Sure, thank you. So next one, just dismount my block. Next one I'm going to do is I'm going to work into the front of the body since we've done sort of the back and the side. And Kathy, at any point, if you want to step in and throw any extra body parts in there, fine with me. This next one is going to be for pec minor, which is a little muscle underneath the big bulkier part of the pecs, which is what we think of as kind of like the bench pressing muscles, the ones that get really developed in men and in women are sort of underneath the breast tissue, usually not underdeveloped, but not as visible. Underneath pec major, we have pec minor, which again is from the front of the shoulder and inserts on 3 of the ribs here, right at the front of the chest. So in this space between the front of my shoulder and the front of my chest, if I go right to the center, I'm going to feel a really tender spot. So if you're sitting at home watching this, maybe try to find that little measurement and just work your way around in there. If you feel gritty, ropey tightness, probably have a tight pec minor. A tight pec minor is going to do something like this to your seated position. So an open pec minor is going to allow for much more of this, which we'll see in Tadasana, mountain pose. We'll see in really just anatomically lined up posture in general. A way to get into it, we do this one in practice a lot without any props, is just lying on the belly, taking the arm either straight out to the side or a goalpost gets a little more bicep involved, rolling to that side of the body, and then potentially lifting the top leg up to step it behind us, maybe even adding a half bind on the top arm. That's going to be a really good way to open up the brachial plexus in general, which is where the front of the shoulder holds space for nerves to run through and then down the arm. So this is a really good one if you say didn't have any props and you just wanted to kind of work into the front of the shoulder in that way. A way to take it to a whole different level is to have a little lacrosse ball or a tennis ball would work. A golf ball is a little too small for this one, but something a little bit larger, like a lacrosse ball size, would be perfect. You're going to place that right at the front of the shoulder. So again, you can measure by sort of finding a little divot in the front of the shoulder where your fingers should just kind of sink into right at the front. And then finding where your ribs are, and your sternum, your breastbone is right at the center of your rib cage. So going just an inch or two lateral, and then making that one of your marking points between the front of the shoulder and that area. Right at the center is where you're going to find pec minor. So 2 options. You can do that same exercise lying on your belly, except with a ball underneath. You might not even need to roll to the side to feel this one, or you might find that it's actually really helpful to come into the full pose. Another option is you can have a yoga block set up with that ball on top of it. This time you're just going to lay flat on your belly, but you'll line up that same area at the front of the shoulder onto your block. And for this one, you can just kind of let your forehead come down to the ground, or maybe have a pillow or something like that to rest underneath you. Now, contrary to what Kathy was just saying in the previous pose, we don't actually want to think about lengthening anything here. We want to sink as much as we can. Because when we're using lacrosse balls and myofascial release techniques, we line up the pose the right way. But then after lining up the pose, we do want to use gravity more so than anything else. So to your point, it is good to lengthen and make space. But once you've lengthened and make space, try not to overwork to stay in that position. Let yourself just melt into whatever props you're using. So that's a good one for pec minor. While I've got this ball, I'll just go over a couple of other things that you can do with it. One of which you probably won't like. A lot of these you might not like, but they're really good. And then after the fact, you're like, wow, I didn't realize I was so tight. Another one that you may not like is to get into the calf muscles, which are usually a lot tighter than we expect them to be. So for that one, you would come into, say, a tabletop position. You would place the ball right behind your knee, and you would just sit back towards your heels. Notice my body's trying to reject the ball and press it off to the side. So I want to lift up, center it as best I can, and then come back down. That's really intense. So if for me that's too much intensity, I can lean forward like so, or I can lift my hips up a little higher. And over time, walking the ball down the leg the same way I would walk the ball down the length of the spine to stretch and to release. Over time, you might find that it's easier for the ball to get situated in place. Whereas for some of us working down the leg, if maybe we've got really tight Achilles tendons, or maybe we have plantar fasciitis, it could actually get a little bit worse as you go down the leg. But you're in control of your body weight, so you can decide exactly how much you want to work with at any given time. Once you've gone from knee to ankle, you might decide to go from ankle back up to the knee. So you could start just kind of working your way up, sitting with it. I'm going really fast because we don't want this video to be 5 hours long, but you could be in each position for a couple of minutes if you're able to stand it. Now, let's say this one was really manageable and comfortable. You could even start to lift and sit up taller to find a better posture with it. Whereas if it's really unbearable, again, what you want to do is lean forward and put less of your body weight into the actual myofascial release.
Again, work with it. Don't think that you have to get to the end the first time around.
Right.
Remember a very important word that Alison said, over time. Work the muscles, stretch them out over time. Try not to think that you have to get to the end result the first time you do it. Maybe gradually you're working just with your hands here. And then the next time you do it, I can get a little bit deeper. And the next time I can get a little bit deeper. Gradually take care. Remember the one yoga class that Alison taught? She said you want to encourage a muscle to stretch. You don't want to force a muscle to stretch. You want to encourage it. You want to encourage the body to let go. Okay? Try not to put it in agony.
Yeah, we don't need to get masochistic, even though some of this will be a little bit masochistic.
Yes.
Be patient with yourself. A lot of it's very tight. A lot of it's very deep fascial connections and adhesions that we've built up over years of our lives. So like Kathy was saying, it's just like a yoga stretch. You don't expect to put your foot behind your head and do a full split the first time you go to a yoga class. You expect to generally start to be able to stand in a lunge, and then to work beyond that into a low lunge, half Hanuman, full Hanuman, and beyond. So it is a journey, exactly. One more that I'm going to show you, and then I'll kind of turn the mic over to you, and maybe you can throw in a few other exercises if you have any that we skipped over. But one more that I want to share with you guys is a plantar fasciitis relief that I would assume everyone's probably heard of once or twice before in their lives if they've ever had foot tension. But it's really straightforward and simple. For this one, a lacrosse ball works well. A tennis ball is a little too soft, and a golf ball is ideal because it's even smaller. You can articulate a little better. They also make balls that are smaller than golf balls that have little spikes on them, which sounds awful, and I'm sure it is awful, but it's a really good way to get into the plantar fascia. Plantar means the sole of the foot, and fascia is that connective tissue, so we're actually trying to get into the sole of the foot from the heel all the way up to the big toe ball mounds, pinky toe ball mounds. And all you would do for that one is you'd want to be standing up. The ball would be underneath you. You would start with the arch of your foot, and you're just going to drag the ball towards the heel and back to the arch. And then after you've done that a few times, you can work towards more the outer edge of the foot, more towards the inner edge of the foot. You can work the other arches of the foot. We don't just have that main arch. We've actually got 3 arches. You can do more of a circular type pattern. And like our last exercise, like we discussed, you can kind of lean into it as you're more comfortable versus taking your body weight away from it if it feels like an excruciating thing to do right off the bat. Obviously, if you do one foot, even if there's only pain in one foot, do both feet. so that you come out of it feeling a little closer to balance. That one's pretty intuitive. You'll probably feel the little adhesions as you work through it. A little side note, just in my own personal life, I've always had right side hip knee issues because of the sole of my right foot. I stepped on a shell when I was 6 years old and it went into my foot. Big operation, all that fun stuff. To this day, I have a ball of scar tissue that at this point is about the size of a blueberry. 2 years ago was about the size of a grape. And 10, 15 years ago was probably a little bit larger than that. Over time, I've actually taken this wound up ball of scar tissue with exercises similar to one I just showed you guys, and I've created a whole lot of relief within that scar tissue. I can't say 110% for sure that that was responsible for my hip or knee or outer leg tension ever, or my glutes not firing the right way. But I can tell you that once I started to focus on that as a problem, or not even so much a problem, but something that wasn't balanced because I don't have a ball of scar tissue in my left foot, once I started to seek out that balance, all my hip pain, knee tension, foot stuff went away. In fact, I had an excruciating amount of pain in the lateral edge of my foot, which is the gallbladder line, for a good year straight. And then once I started working on the sole of my foot, it did go away. So something to consider, because I know things like plantar fasciitis can seem like they're end of the world old age problems, and really they aren't. Even something arthritic, someone diagnosing you as having arthritis, all that means is there's inflammation. So if you're taking care of your diet, if you're taking care of your fascia, if you're making sure your muscles don't get too tight or unbalanced, or imbalanced rather, there's a very good chance that any pains or aches that you have will be able to be rectified. Even if it's not all the way, you can definitely trend towards relief.
Relief, yes. Another good thing is take a bath in apple cider vinegar. Like a cup and a half to a big tub of water. Always test your skin first to make sure there's no irritation. But apple cider vinegar is a great anti-inflammatory, along with Epsom salt. So you can always, do your stretching and then take a nice bath afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That's always healthy.
Or vice versa. You could take the bath, really soften up the tissue,
absolutely,
and then sink into these exercises a little better.
Absolutely.
So it works on either end. Just like yoga stretches before or after your workout routine are going to benefit you in either direction.
Right.
But that's a good point.
Yeah. And the foot things that Alison did standing, you could do that if you're sitting at your desk.
Mm-hmm.
Put the ball underneath your feet when you're sitting at your desk and just roll. Just roll to encourage that tissue to stay soft and pliable. It doesn't have to be a lot of pressure, just a little bit, when you're at your desk, just a little bit of relief. If you're sitting at a desk, you can do a seated cat and cow in your chair, push yourself away from your desk, and say, if you're seated in a chair, you can do your cat cow right here and just relieve that spine. You can do your up seated 4 in your chair at your desk, and just reach forward and up to relieve a little bit of tension in the hip or low back area. These are all things like you would call self-care. Self-care. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah.
There's one other thing.
I will jump in with one more thing, just because that made me think of it. There are levels of pressure for each of these poses. So if a pose seems like, wow, that's excruciating, I just can't do that, there's always a better option, or there's always options in either direction. You can take it deeper by applying more body weight. You can make it easier by applying less body weight. So even, for example, this pec minor stretch that I showed you guys, or not even stretch so much as myofascial release, if I came here and I felt like, wow, that's just way too much, what I could also do, and I won't do it on our nice poster board here, but I could even set up my ball in the area that I wanted to have it for my myofascial release. And then I could walk up to some wall space and just lean my chest into the wall and get the same result. And that gives you the ability to control how much pressure goes into the myofascial release right off the bat, so that you can kind of gauge what you're ready for, gauge what you're able to tap into. Over time, you'll be able to go deeper, because like a stretch, it's going to progress and your body's sort of going to reset into its new length and definition and balanced tone as the fascia resets.
Right. And when you do those, you want to be aware of your breath. So as you inhale, you're kind of lifting away from the ball or from the foam roller, and on your exhalation, that's when you let your body weight sink into the ball or the foam roller.
Yeah, that's a good point.
That's where you're going to get the release. It's on the exhalation. The inhalation is a little lift away, and the exhalation, you're just going to let the body relax and to sink in. And then again, like Alison said, depending on the amount of pressure that you can tolerate, you only go as far as the body allows. Okay? But always use your breath. Very, very important. Always use your breath.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, every exhale is an opportunity for you to kind of sink into your situation a little bit more. And remember, these poses, say for the foam rolling, which is a little bit more movement-based, but these poses, especially when you're using lacrosse balls and blocks and the lacrosse ball peanut and golf balls, things like that, they are body weight dependent. So the more you can use gravity to kind of lean into them, the more effective they'll be over time. You don't want to jump right into the most intense stretch you've ever done, but as you allow yourself to relax into the pose, you actually will get better results as opposed to kind of bracing yourself away from the pose. So every time you exhale, it's an opportunity to picture that ball sinking deeper into the tissue to give you a little bit more space, or to picture the block that's underneath your lats spreading out the tissue that's dense as you sink into what's supporting you from underneath. So breath is really important.
Yeah. Now again, a lot of people have that intrascapular knot.
Yeah.
Can we put the ball behind there and line?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the cool thing about these balls is you can get really intuitive about them. Once you sort of know the base level awareness of what's going on in your body or where your problem areas might be, it can be as intuitive as saying, hey, I've got shoulder pain and it's right between my shoulder blade and my spine. So I'm literally going to line that ball up with my pain, lie down on my back, maybe just sink into it, see if that gives me some relief. Or with or without the block underneath the pelvis, I can just kind of adjust where I am on my mat. And again, it's like a bear in the woods rubbing its back against a tree. You just kind of work your way into whatever tissue feels like it's flared up. For this one, oftentimes, if you kind of cross fiber side to side against the erectors that line the spine, you can get a really good result. If you go up and down, you'll get into the rhomboids, which will also give you a good result. You can relax the arm out to the side and just sit with it and let gravity do the work, or you can kind of shift your body weight right to left and find something that's manageable but gives you a little bit more pressure. Another thing that works really well for those between the shoulder blade areas, between the shoulder blade and spine areas, is getting a bigger ball. This one is by a brand called Skills, it looks like, SKLZ. I think I got it at Dick's Sporting Goods or somewhere like that, which is a place that you can get a lot of this stuff. You can also, I don't like to recommend Amazon because, you know, Amazon, but you can also just hop on Amazon or a search engine and look up myofascial release balls or techniques, and there's tons of stuff, tons of information, tons of products. So a larger ball that, again, is really dense. So this is not like a kickball type ball consistency. This is a dense rock of a ball that comes underneath my shoulder blade in the same way. And then I've got a little more lift and leverage. So I've got to support my neck because I don't want my head to just hang out here in space. Otherwise I have a new problem. I've got to support my neck, but then I can do the same thing. I can kind of work side to side over the ball. I can cross fiber different muscles. I can extend and flex almost like a cat-cow or a little sit-up here. And all of these different angles, maybe even twisting a bit, are going to help me to break that tissue up. So again, the ball for that particular exercise came in between my shoulder blade and my spine. I could do that on either side. I could also use that to get into my neck and my cervical spine area. Obviously, pressure works really well, but another thing that you could do is just interlace fingers and kind of turn your head and neck through their range of motion, so it's a little pressure massage. So those are a couple of other less sinking into the ball, more kind of explore the tissue and try to loosen it up by moving. You could also just sink into the ball in one of those positions if you wanted to. So that's another good one.
Great stuff.
Yeah, a lot of good stuff.
So basically, we just wanted to provide you with some other options to get those little knots, those little tight spots out of the body. If it wasn't time for yoga class or you're stretching or whatever, or you wanted something just a little bit deeper, these are options for you to do on your own. And if you have any questions, you can always email us and we'll get back to you. Kathy at providencehealthandfitness.com, and we can answer all your questions. All right. Thank you, Allison.
Yeah,
I appreciate
thank you, Kathy.
your time.
And thank you, guys.
Hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you.